Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson, and I'm here with B'nai Lappi for this week's episode of the Oral Talmud. Hey, B'nai.
Hey Dan, how are
Uh,
you?
I'm pretty good. I'm trying to remember. Like, I feel like now, like we've talked about this before. Like, we live in some weird, time space continuum. Where, like, last Thursday, did we know what happened in the election yet? We had our suspicions, but it wasn't clear. And now this week, do we do know, but not everybody agrees. It's a very strange time, and very strange time. And again, I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but like the possibility, right? There's all this like controversy over when exactly and why was the Talmud put into writing, and there's like some possibility that it had to do with the rise of Islam and the sort of the sense that the Persian Empire was going to be overrun, and some sense of needing to preserve something. I'm starting to feel I'm starting to feel like I might start to know what living in such a time feels like.
Yeah. Um, okay, totally miscellaneous, totally miscellaneous thought. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about, I had this realization, or we together had this realization that the proof for what were we learning? It was, it was about the sick person eating on Yom Kippur. Remember Lev Yodea?
Mhm.
And there was a whole chain of proofs, and we were speculating as to whether these proofs were actually the proofs which yielded the law, the revised, much more radical, much more sort of compassionate, person-centered, suffering, ameliorating legislation, or whether they were sort of backfill and later explanations to provide a path. And okay, I'm going to go over to my bookshelf here. So where is it? Here. So in Menachem Elon's Jewish law, he talks about, I'm not going to find the page. Anyway, he talks about the difference between midrashic reads of Torah to prove or explain. It's at some point I'll find the terms, but anyway, it's a thing. Apparently, it is a thing. Our suspicion was correct, and Talmud scholars recognize and debate, and apparently that is an open question always as to whether these texts which provide proofs are really legislative history of the actual process or later filled in like possible ways to get to such a radical end.
Hmm.
Anyway, I don't know, I was excited. Now I meant to tell you.
All right. Well, that's good for another day. We'll dive into that even more.
Yeah.
Um, so today we're continuing this text that we're doing from the Tractate Ketubot, where and it's always we're doing a particular case. There's so many layers, right? What we're trying to convey here, right, is that the Talmud is sort of a case book from a law school. So the case itself may be incidental. It may not be. I mean, it may be important to know that we have a particular approach towards marriage and divorce, but in some ways, the case is incidental to be able to learn certain values and principles, and also certain processes like logical processes or other processes where we derive, well, how do we figure out what the rule is? And so this case is a combination of all that. But at least the thing that we're really trying to emphasize right now is that in the rebuilding of a new Judaism after the temple is destroyed, the rabbis are kind of looking at the source that was seen as the authoritative source, whether that's the Torah originally and then later the Mishnah. And they're looking at those constitutions, so to speak, or something like that. And they're saying, well, something has changed, and not so sure that this is how we want to build our society anymore. And what do they do? And so we're suggesting that they're introducing, or some version of introducing, higher values that are now going to overcome those laws or those standards or norms or whatever we want to call them that are in those earlier works, and or that they might not be new, they might be discovering them, that they were always there, but that's something that we'll get into.
Or the values came first, meaning the right, received tradition, the new values, a new sensitivity to other issues and other questions, or new answers to old questions which they didn't have before, and then the perceived incompatibility of that new value with the old system. I think the value comes first.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this particular case, and just a quick recap, and correct me if I've gotten anything wrong, but I'm going to try to do it very quickly just for anyone who wasn't here last week. By the way, you can always go and listen. Maybe you should pause it right now, go listen to last week, and then, or watch last week and then come back. But the basic idea is that we're looking at this case that has to do with a concept called onus, which is the idea that if you have a conditional promise, a conditional contract, in this case, a conditional divorce, and you say, well, there's a certain condition. This divorce, this contract is only going to be in force if a condition happens. In this case, the person is saying, if I don't come back within 30 days, this divorce will become a finalized divorce. But if I do come back between 30 days, then it's not. So the condition is my non-coming back. And derived from the Torah, there's this concept called onus, which means that if the reason why that condition was fulfilled was something that was not in your hands, essentially force majeure, an act of God in jargon, and not an actual act of God, but like something that was out of your control. If that was why this thing happened, then it's as if it didn't happen, meaning that if the reason I did not return after 30 days was because a bear chased me up a tree, then it's as if that I did return within 30 days, meaning that the divorce wouldn't be in play. Yep.
That's right. The application of this principle of onus to this case is just one aspect, it's one tiny application. The Torah-itic notion at play here is the concept of onus, namely that I will be relieved of any negative consequences that result from being forced to do something or prevented from doing something against my will. The rabbis understand that to be God's gift to all of us. We all get this get out of jail free card, and anything that happens as a result of that forced action or inaction is undone and reversed, according to Jewish law. That's the starting point. And then comes this particular case of, what about a conditional contract that goes into effect once the condition is met, but that condition was actually met through forced action, through no fault of my own. I didn't want the condition to actually go into effect, and it went into effect, but it wasn't my fault. So according to this principle of onus, I should be able to undo. We should back up the time clock to before the condition went into effect and say, no, it didn't actually effectively go into effect. And in this case, a divorce written with such a condition wouldn't be a valid divorce.
Right, and let's look at this. I mean, ultimately, the text is going to look at this from the perspective of the wife. So looking at it a little bit from the perspective of the wife, without going into detail right now, it's just to imagine the case. The case is that my husband went off to travel. Of course, this isn't a heteronormative situation. My husband went off to travel somewhere, and he gave me this conditional divorce, and it says if I'm not back within 30 days, then this is a divorce, and you can go off and do whatever you need to do, get married again, whatever you need to do. And so here comes, it's 30 days, he's not here. 31 days, 32 days, he's not here. So from what I can tell as the wife, the condition is fulfilled. He's not here, 30 days, I'm divorced. that would be, but the issue with onus is that if we have this concept of onus, then onus, which is kind of an onus in this case, that what that would mean is that wife would be looking at the divorce and say, well, it is a valid divorce unless the reason why he's not back is that something happened to him, that not that he's dead, but that he's in prison or he's chased up a tree by a bear and he can't come down, so, and I can't know that. So then I'm looking at this, I say, like, well, I think I'm divorced, but I don't know that I'm divorced, right? That's kind of the situation. And so there's
because in the world of onus being a broad, unqualified across every aspect of life permissibility, which the rabbis understand, that woman knows that if her husband does come back and say, yeah, I was chased up a tree, that divorce will be retroactively annulled. And she effectively never really would have been a divorced person and is still not a divorced person. Okay.
Right. And so this is one of the functions of law in general, is to provide certainty. I mean, this is why, for example, we have a statute of limitations.
That's why we're in this weird election situation.
Right. I mean, there's always relevance.
Certainty isn't certain. Okay.
Right, there's always relevance, but part of the thing is, like, that's why we have a statute of limitations, for example, because you want to say, like, look, I don't think I did anything illegal, but if I accidentally did something illegal, I want to at least know that after 5 years, I don't have to worry that after 20 years, the IRS is going to come and arrest me, whatever that is. It's like, no. Like, there's a statute of limitations where, if 5 years have passed, you're good, no matter what might have happened, and there's good and bad of that. But the good part of it is that it does give you some sense of certainty, some sense I know where I stand, and the issue with onus is that in principle, you might never know where you stand, because there's always a possibility that you think that you bought this house, you think that you got this job, whatever it might be, you think you have a contract for your job or whatever, but if it turns out that somebody comes along and says, no, I was forced, this condition only was met because of something that happened that wasn't, a force majeure, an act of God, then that can all be undone. And so there's a certain lack of certainty that becomes inherent in a system that even has onus as a concept, especially if it's indefinite, especially if you can say, well, you could come back 2 years later and say, I was put in prison and I couldn't communicate. So that could be true of like a mortgage, like a home purchase. But then you say, well, okay, so I mean, you'll have to move to another house. I mean, it's too bad, it's unfortunate, but big deal. But the problem here in a case of a divorce is that you might remarry.
Well, we're going to get there. No, we're going to get there.
We're going to get there. But the obvious problem is that you might remarry, and then the problem is that you're married to two different people. I mean, that's the case. I think that would be apparent to anybody. Why is it a problem to think that you might be divorced, but you're not actually divorced? Is you might get married again and be married to two people. There's other cases we'll get to, but like that's why you would want some certainty in terms of divorce. It's a particularly important area to have certainty.
But let's remember that was precisely life. That uncertainty and problem was what obtained before Rava.
Right.
The law that onus applies to everywhere, right, including gets, including conditional gets, when husbands gave gets and divorce documents and then didn't show up. That problem existed, and I think we always have to remember that. I highly doubt that Rava's colleagues were unaware of that obvious dilemma that was presented to women. But I have to conclude that they were willing to tolerate it. Mm-hmm. And it's Rava who says, no, we shouldn't tolerate it. We can't tolerate it.
Right.
And now the Talmud is looking for the justification he used.
Right. So Rava says, Rava, by the way, one of the greatest rabbis, if not the greatest of the Talmud, hero of the Talmud, hero of Svara, it says, it's ein onus begitin. The concept of onus doesn't apply to divorces. So meaning that if you have a condition in your divorce and the condition is met, husband says it's a good divorce if I don't come back within 30 days. He doesn't come back within 30 days. You're divorced. Doesn't matter why he didn't come back. If it happened, that's so there is no onus out in divorce law. And like you say, then the Talmud asks, like, how did he get that idea? And we don't have to go into the first attempt because we did that last show. So they tried.
There were a number of attempts that we didn't even go over, and then last week we went over one attempt that failed. By the way, I just also want to notice for us all that not allowing the get out of jail free card of onus actually disables it. It will force it. What am I trying to say? It takes away a right that men at that time understood Torah to give them. Torah gave them a right to say, hey, but it wasn't my fault. And to have the consequences undone. That has now been stripped from them. And it's going to, for sure, while it's trying to solve the suffering problem that we're going to fully surface today, it is also going to add a new problem. Meaning the man who actually was chased up a tree, that he will no longer be able to stay married to his wife when he gets back.
Yep.
Though those people want to be married to each other, they can no longer be married to each other. And that is not unintended, but it's the outcome. It's the consequence of a more pressing fix that they're willing to tolerate. Did that make sense?
Yeah, and there are always unintended consequences because, and maybe we could talk about that more at the end if we have time, is like because now knowing that I'm not going to have this out in case I'm chased up a tree, put in jail, whatever, now I might be less likely to give my wife a conditional divorce if I'm going off on a dangerous voyage of some kind. And as a result, if I actually do die on the voyage and she doesn't know that I'm dead, she might become an aguna, right? Meaning a person who thinks that she's still married, but actually is a widow. But doesn't know that, and therefore is in the status of an unknown. It's unknown whether she's married or not, and that might happen more often if the husband is worried that, if I give her a conditional divorce, I'll accidentally meet that condition when I didn't want to. So there's all kinds of, unintended consequences that result from any change in the law or any change in how we interpret the law. So ultimately, you're making a kind of making a rebalancing.
Right. Basically, this erasure of the ability to utilize the onus get out of jail free card is going to disable a different set of people than the set of people that it currently disables. So let's take a look at the set of people that Rava is actually most sensitive to, right, and whose suffering he wants to address. And then we'll hopefully circle back to, okay, now who's going to suffer as a result of that fix?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, great. So Rava, so the Talmud says, first of all, that Rava is stating this rule based on his own Svara, here translated as reasoning, but you translate it as moral intuition.
Yeah, and I want to say that people often challenge me. They say, hey, why are you making a big deal about this idea of Svara? It's just a logical deduction. What's the big deal? And I always point to this particular sugya, this exact case, because I think it illustrates that Svara is not operating, at least at this point in Jewish jurisprudential history. By the time we get to the late Amoraim, 3rd, 4th century, Svara has been opened up far beyond a mere logical deduction, and you're going to be able to see the sort of the moral intuition, the ethical impulse that many people will disagree about. And as I said before, I'm sure Rava's colleagues disagreed with him, but this is going to illustrate how this isn't about logic. It's not a deduction. It's not even reason, or reasoning doesn't quite get at it. Okay.
So he says that the Talmud says that he is using his Svara, and it's based on he's concerned about the virtuous women and the licentious women, the snuot and prutzot. And then the Gemara, that's where we stopped last time, and the Gemara then goes on to explain this. So first of all, it talks about the snuot, the virtuous women. So he says there's a concern due to the virtuous women, which is, if you said, let this not be a bill of divorce.
Okay. So, yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, that if you said let it not be a bill of divorce, that means if you don't accept Rava's ruling that onesh should not apply,
right,
and you continue life the way we've been living it,
right,
and you continue to allow husbands, for example, to come back after a conditional get has gone into effect and say that condition only went into effect against my will, so the document, the contract, the divorce document shouldn't be valid, and therefore the get is not a valid get, and we're remarried. In other words, we are retroactively still married. If you continue life as it was, good. Then,
so if you do that, then sometimes when he was not detained unavoidably, but he wasn't chased up a tree, he just didn't feel like coming back, and the wife thinks that he was detained unavoidably, she will sit deserted forever, unable to remarry. Meaning that that in this case, the she's saying, like we were talking about earlier, that was the case that we were talking about earlier, that she's looking at this and says, well, it seems that the condition is met and I'm divorced, but I love him so much and I know he loves me, and I'm sure that he would come back if he could, and I don't believe that he's dead, and so it must be that he was chased up a tree, that he's in jail, that he's detained. He is going to come back. I believe he's going to come back, and I'm going to wait, 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 and then one day I'm going to be old and die, and he will never have come back.
That's right.
And for that reason, this poor woman who actually is divorced, because the reason why he didn't come back was because he found another woman, or he didn't like her, went off to, there were people, I mean, this happened, there's lore. I mean, there are people, I remember these stories of like this from people from the old country, Lithuania, where my family's from. And like the husband went off to South Africa, and like, they didn't know, is he coming back? And that's kind of thing happened, and so the tragedy of it is that his wife is alone for the rest of her life, even though she's actually divorced.
Right. She's holding on to a divorce document, which is valid, because the reason the condition, his non-return within 30 days, went into effect was because he wanted it to, was because he willingly chose to stay away. So that is a valid get. But what Rav is saying is there are women who are going to hold this get and not believe that their husbands actually wanted to stay away. Oh, no, he loves me. Certainly, the only reason he didn't come back within that conditioned, stipulated period of time is because he got chased up a tree. But he will come back. I know he will come back. And when he does, he'll say, oh, I was chased up a tree, and this get will be retroactively annulled, and we will be still married.
Mm-hmm.
But if that, in fact, is not the case, which is, as you say, not uncommon, she will sit forever. And I could just picture Rava's colleagues around the table. What are they going to say? They're going to say, that's her own fault. She's holding a valid get in her hand. She's an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
She could get married. What, you want to abrogate Torah for this woman who's holding a valid get in her hand and could go out and remarry? I don't understand. That's her fault.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Or she shouldn't have agreed to this conditional divorce thing in the first place. I mean,
I don't know about that, because in their framework, a divorce is a unilateral. She doesn't need to agree. So I think that's what they would be saying. And I think
and we've been doing this forever, right? This is how it's always been.
That's right. And I think this is what's being implied here is that Rava is saying, I know she has a valid get in her hand, but it's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to understand that it's the system's fault, not her fault. It's the system's fault that that puts into her head the doubt about this document, because she knows it could be invalidated, and hopes that it will be. And it's our problem to fix. We are actually causing her suffering, not herself.
Right.
But I think it's that shift of where really is the problem that probably happened. I could just feel it. I could just, because that's just such a guy thing to say. You know what I mean? But somehow, and I really want to understand what Rava's family life was like. Like, what woman was really helping Rava understand what it's like to be a female human being? But someone did, because he said, no, this is how, of course, women are going to feel. At least some of them, probably half of them. Yeah.
It's so interesting that you're saying that, because initially when you were talking, I was thinking, like, when you said, oh, this is human nature, I was thinking something along the lines of, well, or at least this is the human nature that we want to support, that we want to hold up and say, no, we want people who love their husband so much, who can't believe that he would abandon him. Like, we want that kind of naivete, even. Like, we want that. It's good for our society. But another way to look at it is, like, that is a more common human nature of women. I'm saying that this is what's going on at that time, than of men. That maybe men, if the role was reversed. And by the way, like, I'm really interested. I don't know if we talked about it on this show. There's this project called Torah Ta, where somebody is regendering the entire Torah and changing the gender of everybody. But that makes for some, like, really interesting cases. For example, where Abraham is now a woman and Isaac is a daughter, and God asks Imrahama, that's the female name of Abraham, Imrahama. But anyway, but the point is, like, God asks the female Abraham to sacrifice her daughter. And part of the absurdity of that story for me is, like, I don't believe that any mother would sacrifice her daughter if God called her. But the problem is that we do believe that a father might. And that's something now. So in this case, I mean, you think, like, first of all these laws are being made up by men. I mean, they have been from time immemorial. And, maybe these rabbis sitting around are like, look, I mean, if it happened to me, I mean, if my wife gave me a conditional divorce and then disappeared, I'd be like, look, I mean, I got to get married, like right, that's men and women, stereotypically, and at that time, but maybe, like, thought about this differently. And so you're right to say, like, there were some women that really got to Rava, right?
Yeah, and it's you can't separate out the power, the systemic power differential between men and women to even say this is a woman thing or a man thing. It's probably a common predilection for some women in a society where a woman is far less able to survive, to be safe, if she's single. So this woman is not merely naively in love with this guy who's out marrying somebody else. She knows it's going to be really tough for her. It's going to be, she has a vested interest in staying married to this guy because of the power structure. So
well, and I think it's easy enough for men to say, well, if I were in this position, I would do it. The fact is that you would never be in that position, because the fact is that the way that our society is organized is that you're by definition protected from ever being in that position. So what you're doing is a thought experiment. What she's experiencing is real. And I just want to say, like, and I bring all that up in part because what we want to ultimately talk about going forward is not so much the question of gets, divorces, and women and men. That is also very important still in our time, and we should take that really seriously. But the additional question is, who in our time is occupying the role that women occupied in that time? Meaning, who are the people who all of society is organized not around their experience, and not to, so whether that's people with disabilities or LGBT folks or people of color in white dominated societies, whatever those might be, and others, that the question is, maybe it's not divorces. Maybe we should look around and say, what are other legal categories that are the ones that are really causing an effect on those groups that the group in power doesn't even realize or doesn't even understand that what the effect is. And
Yes,
ultimately those should be overcome in the same way that Rava's here overcoming Torah doing that to women.
exactly. Just yes, yes, yes.
And you were going to say something.
Yeah, what I was going to say was, why is it that probably men are having a hard time empathizing with this woman? They live in a body, in a life where they have the ability to sever a marriage easily.
Mm-hmm.
A woman doesn't.
Right.
A woman doesn't, in this system, have the ability to initiate a divorce. And let's just note that Rava is not, this entire dilemma would be solved if women had the ability to initiate divorces, but they don't. And Rava, let's note, is not standing up and saying that the real fix is if a woman could initiate again. I mean, I don't think anybody was able to go there. It reminds me of the way that the rabbis in the Talmud describe what Olam Haba, the world to come. What's heaven going to look like? Heaven is going to look like you get up, you go to work, you do your job, you come home from work, and nobody has schmeiced you. That I can go and come in peace, and no one is going to torment me, abuse me, kill me, attack me. That was heaven. That's what heaven is going to look like. That's as far as their imagination could take them. And I really don't think Rava's imagination even could take him to, well, women should be able to give a get. That'll solve this whole problem.
Right. Well, yeah, no, and that's helpful, because that's what, when I was saying, like, there's another unintended consequence that's going to flow from Rava's solution, which is that there might be more agunot, or different people will end up being agunot because they won't even be given a conditional divorce. Like, for me, the solution to that is easy. Like, to get rid of the category of an agunah. That'll have also other unintended consequences. But I mean, ultimately, like, that's better from my view. We can imagine that now. So the question is, and we talked about this, some, more Orthodox communities have this idea of Yeridat HaDorot, the idea that in each generation is less great than the one before. So we can do less mucking around with the law than our ancestors could. But actually, it could very well be the exact opposite. Not only maybe not at all, but also maybe it is that we actually are greater than the previous generations. Like, we have more education and more experience, and more experience in with diverse ideas and diverse people and all of that stuff that might make us greater. But actually, our imagination is greater, right? And we can imagine now a possibility that they couldn't even have imagined then. So now, I could ask now, if Rava could have imagined a situation in which there was no such thing as an agunah, what would he have done? That's a thought experiment, but I believe he would have said, oh yeah, we should do that. Like, we shouldn't have, right? But so now that we can imagine that, what I think we can look to Rava and see, like, oh, when Rava could imagine a way to overrule the dominant legal paradigm of his time, he did. If the reason was to, and I think we're getting to this idea, to alleviate suffering, so we could do that now.
Exactly. Okay, so just to get back to this case, so in the new post-Rava world, where his legislation flies, and it does, that in the realm of gets, the husband isn't going to be able to claim, oh, but it wasn't my fault that this get went into effect. Let's notice who now will suffer. This woman who is not going to sit and hold on to this valid get and wait, because she knows that when her husband comes home, if he should say, in fact, as she believed, I was chased up a tree, that get is not going to be ripped up. The fact that he says, but that condition went into effect against my will. The rabbis are going to say, tough luck, ein onus begitin. We're not going to consider onus anymore in these matters. She knows that she knows that that get will never be ripped up. Therefore, she has no incentive to keep sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And she will presumably remarry.
Mm-hmm.
But what if that husband does in fact come home? Let's notice what's going to happen. When he, in fact, let's say, this is sort of the case where he ran off, but if he hadn't run off and she was right, he's going to come back, say, I was chased up a tree. The rabbis are going to say, sorry, Charlie, and here are these two people who want to be married to each other, always did. Now they can, they're present with each other again, and the law will not let them. They will not be able to remarry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sad. But
because she's married, or because you're not allowed to remarry someone that you, because could she divorce her current husband? And
no, you can't. You can't. She couldn't have sexual relations with somebody else, even legitimate ones, divorce, and then remarry her original husband. That she can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And even though the text doesn't say this anywhere, and I've never found it written anywhere, I have to assume that it is correct that even if she didn't remarry, she wouldn't be able to remarry him. Otherwise, this law would have no teeth. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to assume that for sure she can't remarry him, even if she doesn't
mm-hmm.
marry someone else in the interim. Okay, but that's the cost that Rava's willing to make, or accept,
Mm-hmm.
to resolve the suffering of these women who will understandably sit with a valid get and not remarry. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's one set of people he's concerned about.
Okay, so now there's another set of people.
Yeah.
Which is what's called the licentious women, and
it still bothers me. That translation still bothers me.
I thought you liked it last time.
No, I didn't like it even last time.
Oh.
What it means is just, the literal meaning is the going out women.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And
extroverted.
Willing to get up and respond by seeking a new relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Licentious is when, a woman is describing women who get up easily and enter into relationships that the rabbis find not particularly savory or kosher, even if they're permitted, like non-marital sex, permitted. They're not thrilled by it. But this is a woman who is just like, okay, done.
Yep.
I'm out of here. So let's take a look at this case.
Okay, so those women, if you said, let it not be a bill of divorce.
Again, meaning if you keep the law the way the law was before Rava stood up, namely that a husband could come back after a conditional get went into effect against his will, and he could say, oh no, I was chased up a tree, so we're now still married. Then what
then sometimes when he was detained unavoidably and she thinks that he was not detained unavoidably, right? So this is the opposite case. This is the case where in the previous case, the husband actually didn't want to come back. He was gone, and this woman kept thinking, like, maybe he'll come back, maybe he'll come back. Here's the opposite case. He actually is detained, chased up a tree, and he wants to come back, but she's like 30 days, boop, it's a divorce. I'm off to my next adventure, and then so she goes off.
Which, by the way, let's recognize the law allows her to do.
Right.
She has a valid get in her hand. The condition went into effect. She has a valid get. I think there's a little bit of a suspicion about this woman. The suspicion is that she heard, there's maybe some rumor. She might actually have some intel that her husband's up in a tree, There's a little bit of buzz in town about the guy in the tree. And she might, maybe, I don't know, have some suspicion that actually he was detained against his will. But nevertheless, she says, hey, here's my divorce. It's a valid divorce. But in a looking at her in a slightly better light, she has no premonition one way or the other, no intel. She simply knows she has a valid get, and she's immediately willing to act on it and remarry.
Yeah, and it could be like he's gone, he's not here on day 30, day 31, I go off and get married again, or day 60, but relatively fast, and then he could return, right? And so the result would be that the bill of divorce is actually void because he did experience onus. He was chased up a tree and he came back. And that would mean that she is actually still married to the first man. So now she's gone and gotten married to a second man. So she's married to two men. And her children from the second marriage, because she's essentially officially committing adultery with the second man, and the children of an adulterous relationship are what's called mamzerim, which is often translated as bastards, but the idea is that they're in a particular category of people that is like a bad category to be in. You can't marry everybody. You can only marry other mamzerim.
It's a super bad category, and let's acknowledge that category exists to this day.
Uh-huh.
And is like the situation of women who are not able to initiate a get is one of those just waiting to be mucked with halachic inequities. But yeah, it's a very, very serious consequence. There are still rolls, meaning lists of children born with the status of mamzer in many communities, including in Israel, where those people are not allowed to marry anyone but someone else on this list. It's a very, very, very sad situation.
And so what Rava is saying here is that in order to prevent these children from being mamzerim, that what we're going to do is we're going to is a second reason for wanting to not have onus and to have this certainty in divorces, is that we're going to say if the condition was fulfilled, doesn't matter why. If he's not back within 30 days, in the case of that the condition was 30 days, if he's not back within 30 days, they're divorced, period, end of sentence. She marries a second man. She's actually not married to the first man, even if he comes back and says, I was chased up a tree. No, there is no onus in divorces. And she's only married to the second man, and her children are fine. And everything's okay. That's his decision. So in other words, this idea of not having onus in divorces solves both of those problems. It allows the women who would otherwise be believing and hoping that her man will come back, it allows her to move on. And even if he comes back, you can't marry him, so move on. And in the case of this woman who would happily move on, or unhappily, but would quickly move on, she's good. She's okay. Her children are okay.
Exactly.
And those are the people, like you were saying, that Rava's concerned about.
Exactly. Okay, so now we understand what was motivating Rava. All of that was a description of his svara. And as I said before, I think this really illustrates that svara is much more a moral source than a source which is simply logic or reasoning.
Yeah, because logic, you could say logic could take you somewhere else, because it's a question of, like, it's not only the logic. It's like saying that I want to have this moral result. Now I can logic my way there.
That's right.
But it's results driven jurisprudence, so to speak. It's saying, like, no, and the result is not necessarily logical. It's moral.
That's right. That's right. Because everyone around that table with Rava, I'm sure, could articulate the very same outcome of the law as it stood. Logically, yes. But it's the impulse to say that's not something we should tolerate, which is where the svara lives.
Right.
Right? Absolutely. I think that was helpful for me to to clarify for myself. The
Yeah.
Svara is in the not recognizing the suffering, but recognizing that it has to be addressed. It's at that place that Svara is recognized as a valid as valid. I don't know.
Well, because if you said that, because if you said the opposite, if you said that there is, we are going to maintain onus in divorce law, then you could say, and the question is why? Well, we're doing it for the men, right? But Rava used his logic, and he said the reason is we're doing it for the men, because if you don't have onus, then there could be a man who's chased up a tree, and then he comes and and his wife is married to somebody else, and what a tragedy, and right, and so that's logical. That's not only logical; it's driven by a moral. We care about these men. So what we're seeing here is that Rava's saying, I'm actually choosing these women over these men, and that's not logical. That's moral. That's a weighing. That's saying that this suffering is greater, or these people are more powerless in society, and so they're going to be more likely to suffer. And I'm going to address that.
Exactly.
Okay, so then let's go on. So then the Talmud's a little surprised by this.
Right. Okay, now here comes, this is my favorite part of this sugya, which is really my favorite sugya. Okay, so at this point, the editor of the Talmud jumps in. And by the way, it has been the editor explaining out Rava's thinking, Rava's Svara, let's say. And now the editor acts as if he can't believe what Rava has done and is shocked and, incredulous. And he says, take it away.
And it's really that second case that the editor is most concerned about here. He says both, but it's really that second case of the open woman, the quote licentious woman that's really concerned about. We'll explain that in a second. So the editor says, and is there a matter where by Torah law it is not a bill of divorce, meaning onus is from the Torah. So if he's chased up a tree by Torah law, meaning the highest source of law, second highest potentially, that it's that this is actually this divorce was not actually enforced, but due to this svara, where you're concerned about the virtuous women and the licentious women, we permit a married woman to others, meaning that in that second case, right, if onus is a Torah law, that means that he's chased up a tree. According to the Torah, this divorce is not enforced, even though he's been away 30 days, but it's not enforced because he was chased up a tree.
Exactly.
According to the Torah, his wife is still married to him. And here she's one of the licentious open women. So she's gone off and married a second guy. She is now married to two men. She's committing adultery with the second man. I mean, she's not married to two men. The second marriage is not legal. She's having sexual relations with the second man and then having children with them, right? And all of that's happening. And the Torah says that the divorce was not valid, and therefore she is married to the first woman. So you're allowed. So that's the Torah landscape. You're coming in and you're saying we're going to overrule that Torah landscape and say that we're not going to accept onus in the case of divorces. But the Torah doesn't say that. You're just introducing that because you're concerned about these women. But the result is that there's a situation where, according to the Torah, you're letting a woman have an adulterous relationship with a second man, and you're going to allow that situation to be just because of your concern.
And you're going to stand under the chuppah with them and marry that woman, right? Whom the Torah says is still married to her first husband.
Right.
You're going to actually perform that marriage for that woman next week and marry her legitimately, and understanding that she, in the eyes of the Torah, is going to be an adulteress and enter into an adulterous relationship. And the answer is?
And the answer is, the Gemara answers, yes.
And it's not just yes. It's yes, indeedy. Yes, indeed. That's exactly what we're going to do. Okay? So there is this recognition. It's like the editor is saying here to the reader, just in case you didn't see the import of what is going on here, I'm really going to point it out to you by making this sort of rhetorical, asking this rhetorical, wait a minute, do you mean to tell me that in the eyes of the Torah, this woman who should be, right? In the eyes of the Torah, she's a married woman to the first. You're going to marry her and allow her to be in it? Yes, that's what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Or like, yep.
Yep. Yes, sirree. Yes, indeedy. Yes, indeedy. Okay. Now let's stop for there a sec. At this point in the sugya, it's very clear that svara is being used to overturn two Torahitic directives. Number one, onsa rachmana patre, the idea that ones is an exculpatory claim anywhere in the world, anywhere in life.
Mm-hmm.
And Rava says, no, but not here in the matter of gets. And secondly, the prohibition of adultery is being erased, right, in this circumstance. In other words, the Rava's svara is actually going to allow that which the Torah prohibits. And this is one of the very, very clear examples or example cases from which we see that svara is equal to Torah in its ability to develop the legal system. It is the only other source in the whole system equal to Torah and can sometimes trump Torah. And actually, every time it's evoked, that's exactly what it's doing. It's overturning Torah. So, you know, we don't have a kind of systematic treatment of Jewish law, except for, you know, works like this, Menachem Elon's, you know, like modern day textbooks, because that's just not the way rabbinic literature works. And so there's no line in any rabbinic sefer, any book that says Svara trumps Torah. You can only understand that when you look at cases and you see it operating that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we know that Svara is a source, not only a source, but the only source that actually trumps Torah. And I think this gets to this conversation that we often have about it's everything is Svara. There's this recognition that the whole system is not only upgraded through Svara, but I think the rabbis understood Torah in the first place to be our best Svaraitic guess at what God wants us to do, and a product of Svara itself. So there's nothing really new, I think, in their minds in this use of Svara to continue growing the tradition.
I mean, when
the turtles.
Well, that's a story where who was it that was speaking to a woman who's, you know, was it Darwin? I don't think so, but it was like some kind of conversation, and a woman they were talking about like the Earth being in space. He said, no, the Earth is being held up by a turtle. You know, and they said, well, what's holding up the turtle? She said, another turtle, you know, and he said, well, and ultimately said it's turtles all the way down.
Right. What's holding up that turtle? I love that. Yeah.
Right. And so it's Svara all the way down. That really, like everything you think it's Svara overturning Torah. No. The Torah is based on Svara. So it's just all Svara. And periodically Svara gets translated first from an intuition, you know, from something in like your gut, your kishkis, as you say. It gets turned into oral Torah, into sort of an oral tradition and set of norms, not written anywhere. Then eventually those norms get written down in writing. And then we could talk about this, and I think we have a little bit, and we will over time. The problem with putting something into writing, this is where we get into issues of originalism and all that, is writing sometimes takes you in the wrong direction. Eventually, you don't realize that the way you wrote something wasn't written clearly, or the times change and the words have different meaning, or the understanding is different. And so 200 years later, your writing is actually a problem. I mean, think of the Second Amendment there. I mean, this might be my not everyone has to agree, but it's pretty clear to me that the Second Amendment has to do with militias and has to do with, it doesn't have to do with individuals having machine guns. And but the words are not super clear because it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to freedom, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You could say that those are independent clauses, and it just says the right is not to be infringed, and that's really clear. That's probably not what they meant, but they wrote it that in a bad way. So now we've got a problem 200 some odd years later. That's the problem with writing. And so what do you do at that point? You're back to Svara. You say, well, I can't mean that. And, that's not what we write. And then you say, well, we have a tradition that people can have, hunting guns, but not machine guns, and you somehow, you eventually, that's our case law that interprets the Constitution. But the time may come where you actually have to amend the Constitution because, you basically need another writing. And then the whole cycle continues, right? And that's what's going on here. We have the Torah, then the Mishnah, and now we're in the post-Mishnah process where the Gemara is being written, and here we have it written. And now here we are 2,000 years later, and we're asking, does that mean that we're stuck with this text, or do we still have Svara? And it's actually not new Svara; it's Svara all the way down. It's always been Svara, right? And so the idea that we are being controlled by a text that does not accord with our Svara, with our sense of what's right and what's moral, is completely wrong-headed. That's never been the right way. It's always been that if there was if we get to a point where our Svara tells us that this text is wrong, Svara trumps the text.
Exactly.
So, by the way, the only other thing I want to say, and I think it connects to what the last part of this text, is that this happens to be a case where the Svara, as we understand it, as a moral intuition, is very, very clear and stated explicitly.
Yeah.
Once we see this, then we go back to all the other texts that have a wink. We've already covered so many of them that have a wink. They have a citation to the Torah that obviously doesn't mean that, or the text about keeping the pikuach nefesh, the saving of a life, and it attributes it again to some text, you should live by them, which is sort of questionable. All of that stuff, it's actually all Svara. It's all Svara with a little bit of sort of papering over in an attempt, because Svara is dangerous. If the point is that you went around and said, oh, there is no law, everybody should, this is the end of the beginning of the book of Judges, where it says there was no king in Israel and everybody did what was right in his own eyes. That's seen in the book of Judges as a negative. Like that's a state of nature. That's a scary, that everybody can do what's right in their own eyes. That's not a kind of a world that we want to live in. So that's Svara taken to the extreme. So there's an attempt to tame Svara by trying to find an argument that really isn't the real reason we got here, but it could explain it. And so whenever we can do that, we do. And only every once in a while is it really explicit. And here too, there's a little bit of an attempt to, say, oh, it's not quite, there's a little explanation given it.
Yeah, and I think we'll go there next week.
Okay.
And what's interesting is the Yerushalmi, the Palestinian Talmud, which has this very sugya in it, really is very comfortable with this open acknowledgement that Svara is going to be used to trump Torah. It can trump Torah, and that's exactly what we're going to do. And they explicitly say there, and the rabbis have the power to overturn Torah. They say it, period. It's like the eternal question, the 64,000, it's not a question. Why is anybody thinking it's a question? Can the rabbis overturn Torah? Of course they can. Of course we can overturn Torah. Talmud says we can. But the Babylonian Talmud doesn't repeat that line, and it goes somewhere else, and we'll go there next week.
Okay.
The one thing I want to respond to is I would say that the other presumptive methodologies of using verses in forced ways to claim that a new, more compassionate legislation or whatever is rooted in Torah. Those don't tame Torah, Svara. They simply camouflage it. So I wouldn't say that they suppressed or tamed Svara, but I completely agree with you. And Menachem Elon, who lays out how the whole Jewish system works and names the sources, says that of the 5 sources, Torah, custom, legislation, precedent, and Svara, all the others besides Svara are driven by Svara.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're not moved to make an innovation except by anything other than your kishkes, by recognizing that something's wrong in the world, that
Mm-hmm.
the tradition as it is causing suffering, is hurting people, is not allowing, right?
Yep.
So it's Svara that motivates them all, that all the sort of 5 methodologies, but only one acknowledges, sort of shows its hand. And it doesn't do that often, just like any legal system can't do that often, as you're saying. And I'm always interested in asking myself, why do they show their hand here and not there? And I don't know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I mean that's an important question, and one that we should keep our eye on and think about. Because again, for me, the what's driving this in part is to say, when we look at the rest of, well, we not just Jewish law, but when we look at Judaism today and we say, who's it hurting? That really the answer ultimately that I'm seeing here is that if you can answer that question, if you can say that it's hurting someone, then we got to fix it so it stops hurting that person. And then the question is, when do we do that dramatically and explicitly, and when do we do that a little bit more in a little bit more of a hidden way? But either way, we're stopping the pain.
That's right. And as you said, you have to understand every example of how we have in the past upgraded Jewish law as being an expression of Svara. So your meta question always has to be, where's the Svara here? Where's the suffering that they're fixing? And how are they doing it? As I learned from my teacher, David Kramer, you not only have to look at the change in the law, you have to look at how the tradition is portraying the way in which they made that change. And that's where you can sort of sniff out Svara at work. So
right.
to be
continued.
To be continued, and we'll I think as we keep learning, try to be pointing out the Svara that's driving the other methodologies of change.
Okay, so next week like you say, we'll pick up a little bit at the very end here, talk about that, and we have an analogous, a similar case that will help us build on some of these ideas, and that'll be fun. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
See you next week, Danae.
Thanks, Dan. See you next week.
Bye.